He had survived droughts and rival males and the brutality of this wilderness for over a decade. He had scars layered on top of scars. But right now, none of that mattered because he was completely helpless. His massive head was locked inside the forked trunk of an old acacia tree, and no matter how hard he pulled, no matter how desperately his legs clawed at the cracked earth beneath him, he could not get free. And they knew it. 6 hyenas were already moving around him in a slow, patient circle, getting tighter with every second. They were not in a hurry. They had all the time in the world. He was going nowhere. What happened next would change the way I understand this wilderness forever. And I am still not sure I have words for it. If this opening already has your heart pounding, hit that like button right now and subscribe because this story gets so much bigger. Don't miss what comes next. I had been on duty for nearly 9 hours when it happened. The eastern sector of the reserve is one of the quieter zones during the dry season. The water holes there shrink to shallow puddles by mid-afternoon, and most of the larger predators push west toward the permanent river. So I was not expecting trouble. I was moving at a steady pace along the ridgeline, checking the snare traps we had pulled 2 days earlier, making a few notes in my patrol log, letting the familiar rhythm of the savannah settle around me. The light was already starting to turn. When the sun drops low out here, it turns everything amber and bronze and makes even the dry grass look like something precious. I always take a moment for that. Even after all these years. Then the sound hit me from the right. It was not one sound, it was a layered, overlapping chaos of roaring and screaming and that terrible rising cackle that every ranger learns to dread. I turned. And I froze. Because what I saw made no sense for a full 2 seconds. The largest predator on this side of the reserve was trapped. A male lion, old, broad-shouldered, his dark mane matted with dust and dried blood, had his head wedged into the forked trunk of a dead acacia. His body was twisted sideways, his enormous paws scrabbling at the ground, finding no purchase. And the hyenas had already found him. There were 6 of them. I counted fast, the way you learn to when things are moving badly. 6 is not a small pack in the open savannah, 6 is a war party. They were spread in a loose, instinctive ring around the lion, and even at a distance I could see they had already been working him. The dirt around his trapped head was gouged and dark. His sides were heaving in massive labored breaths. And the alpha female, I recognized her immediately by the torn patch of fur on her left flank, old scar tissue showing pale under the sun. She had already drawn first blood. I could see the streaks on the lion's left thigh from where she had already hit him once. She moved with the quiet confidence of an animal that knows it has already won. She was not rushing. She was simply trimming the edges of his remaining strength, waiting for the exact moment when the fight goes out of a creature completely. I have seen it before. I know what it looks like when an animal reaches that point. The hyenas were not frenzied, they were methodical. And that, if anything, was more terrible to watch than if they had simply charged all at once. The lion growled, a sound so deep it moved through my chest like a subsonic wave, and brought his front paws down hard on the earth. One of the younger hyenas on the far side flinched and stepped back. But the alpha female did not even blink. She simply adjusted her angle and began moving in again from the left. She knew exactly what she was doing. The lion's neck was locked. He could not turn his head. He could not bite. All he had were those front paws, and they could only reach so far, and there was no way a single animal, trapped and exhausted, could defend every direction at once. Everything in my training told me to keep walking. We are not interventionists. The natural cycle of predator and prey is not ours to edit. It is written into every rule and protocol and briefing I have sat through since my first day on this reserve. Do not interfere. Observe. Document. Walk away. I have followed that rule hundreds of times. I have watched things I will never forget, things I will not describe here, and I walked away because that is what the work requires of you. But I did not walk away this time. I cannot explain it entirely even now. Some of it was calculation. The lion was stuck, meaning a natural kill was impossible, meaning this was not a natural hunt at all. But mostly it was something older and simpler than that. I could not leave him. I raised my rifle and fired once into the air. The crack of it split the late afternoon apart like a seam. The entire pack lurched sideways simultaneously, every hyena jumped. Some broke fully and ran 20 meters before stopping. I did not pause. I kept moving forward, shouting at full volume, waving my free arm, making as much human noise as I could. For a long moment it seemed to be working. The pack retreated to the edge of the clearing, spreading along the tree line in a loose, watchful line. The alpha female stood still in the grass and watched me with those pale eyes. I could see her deciding. She came from the left without any warning. She was simply not there, and then she was, covering the ground between us in an instant, low and fast, her shoulder dropping as she hit within reach of me. I fired under her paws. She jumped back, circled again. And then she came a second time. And this time I was not fast enough. Her teeth caught my left forearm and dragged downward. The pain was immediate and complete, a burning, tearing sensation that went all the way to my shoulder. I fired directly under her muzzle. The bullet clipped her paw. She screamed and broke away to the left, and within 30 seconds the entire pack had followed her into the tall grass. Gone. I pressed my right hand against the wound and held still for a moment. The savannah had gone quiet in the way it only does when something significant has just happened. Not true silence, there is no such thing out here, but a held breath, a pause in the ordinary chorus. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear the lion's labored breathing 15 meters away. I looked down at my radio. The casing had cracked fully in two during the struggle, the circuit board visible and dark. No signal. No way to call back to base. No backup coming. I had one thing left in my favor: the hyenas were gone. For now. But I also knew what that meant. I knew what hyenas do. They do not leave a meal. They wait. They come back in the dark, when the light is gone and their eyes are better and the odds have shifted further in their favor. I had maybe an hour. Maybe less. And the lion was still stuck. And I had no idea if I could help him, and no idea how badly that arm was going to affect what came next. I stood up. I walked toward the lion. Because there was nothing else to do. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment saying I am still here. Let's see who is truly following this story all the way through. I knelt beside him slowly, making no sudden movements. He was past growling. Whatever energy had kept him fighting the tree and the hyenas for what must have been hours was almost entirely spent. His chest moved in great heaving waves. His fur was darkened with dried sweat and with blood from the hyena bites. His hind legs trembled faintly against the ground, the muscle memory of escape still firing in nerves that had nothing left to give. I placed my right hand against his muzzle, gently, firmly, not to control him but to steady us both. I looked at his left cheek. And I saw it. The scar. Wide. Uneven. Pale against the thin fur of an old animal's face. Shaped exactly like a crescent moon. I had not seen it up close in 6 years. But I had never stopped seeing it. There are things you carry with you in this work that never become ordinary, no matter how many times the seasons turn. That scar was one of them. It was why I had run toward the hyenas instead of away. It was why my arm was bleeding. It was why I was kneeling here now in the fading light of an African afternoon talking to a lion who could not hear me. Because I owed him my life. And I knew it. And I think, somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the pain and the animal fury of the last hour, some part of me believed he knew it too. 6 years earlier I was a different person. I was 23 years old, I had been on the reserve for less than 4 months, and I was still learning things the hard way, which is the only way the savannah teaches. That afternoon I made an error that experienced rangers simply do not make. I had pushed too far north during my patrol, past the markers that indicated active elephant migration routes. I thought I had more time before the herd passed. I was wrong. I heard them before I saw them, which is always the case with elephants moving at speed. It starts as a subsonic pressure in the ground, then a rolling thunder of feet, then the cracking of wood and the deep resonant calls that carry for kilometers. By the time I had turned around, the herd was already in sight, moving fast through the scrub on a line that would bring them directly through where I was standing. I looked left. I looked right. The nearest tree was too far. The grass was too short to hide in. And the young bull at the front of the herd had already dropped his head. That is not exploration. That is a charge. And I was the obstacle. I did not run. I want to be clear that this was not bravery. It was paralysis. Pure, complete, shutting down fear. I stood there and watched the gray wall coming toward me, and I understood, with a calm that still frightens me to remember, that I was about to die. There was no action to take. There was nowhere to go. I simply stood there and waited for the impact. He came out of the grass on my left like something conjured. A male lion, fully grown, in the absolute peak of his strength, his mane thick and dark, his body enormous and completely still, every muscle a question asked of the oncoming herd. He did not look at me. He did not acknowledge me at all. He simply walked to a point about 15 meters in front of where I stood and stopped. He looked at the elephants. And then he roared. I have heard lions roar many times. It is a sound that does not become ordinary. But what he produced in that moment was something different from anything I had heard before or since. It was a wall of sound, a physical force, something that hit you in the sternum and compressed the air in your chest. The lead bull elephant slammed to a stop. He raised his trunk. He trumpeted, enormous and furious, and then turned the herd. Not away from the clearing entirely, but away from me. They swung wide, moving at full speed along a new line, and the lion ran. He ran directly in front of the herd to keep their attention, to give me time that I had not earned and did not deserve. One of the rear elephants caught him as it passed, a swinging tusk strike at full gallop, a blow that should have broken him completely. I watched the lion leave the ground. I watched him hit the earth and roll and go still. I was certain he was dead. And then he stood up. He shook his mane, took one staggering step, found his footing, and moved away into the grass. The herd was already gone. The sound of them faded over the ridge. I was still standing in the same spot, still breathing, still alive, with nothing to show for any of it. Except that on the lion's left cheek, where the tusk had caught him at that terrible speed, there was a long torn wound. The shape of a crescent. Fresh, raw, bleeding freely into his fur. I worked at the fork of that acacia for nearly 20 minutes. My left arm was nearly useless. The hyena bite had gone deep and the muscle had begun to seize, so I was working almost entirely with my right hand, trying to find angles, trying to understand how the wood had closed around him, pushing at sections of the trunk to find any give at all. The lion tolerated me with a patience I did not expect. He was past fighting. I think he simply had no resistance left. Occasionally his legs would move in those involuntary trembling bursts, the body's last attempts to break free, and I would stop moving until it passed. The acacia had trapped him at a narrowing point in the fork. His skull had gone through at an angle and then twisted, which was what had locked him. I needed to reduce the angle. I braced my back against the main trunk and pushed the smaller branch with everything I had. The wood moved. Not much, a centimeter, maybe two, but it moved. And that was enough. The lion shifted his weight backward and his head came free with a sound like a muffled crack. He staggered 2 steps to the right. He shook his head slowly. He stood there in the last failing light of that day and breathed. I kept my distance. I sat down on the ground, which was partly strategy and partly because my legs had decided they were done. My arm was bleeding steadily. The light was almost gone. Somewhere out there, I knew, the hyenas were waiting. And the old lion just stood there with his head low and his sides moving slowly in and out, and did not look at me, and did not move toward me, and did not move away. We simply existed in the same space for a few minutes as the last color drained out of the sky. He walked away when he was ready. No ceremony. No backward glance. He simply turned and moved into the darkness of the savannah the way lions do, soundlessly, completely, becoming part of the night in a matter of seconds. I sat there for a while longer, pressing my arm, listening to the reserve settle back into its nighttime rhythms. My radio was destroyed. My ammunition was gone. I had a significant bite wound on my left arm, a lion that was now somewhere in the dark ahead of me, and a walk of about 4 kilometers back to the base in a savanna where the hyenas I had just antagonized were still very much present. I made it back before midnight. The wound required cleaning and stitching and a course of antibiotics that lasted 3 weeks. I filed an incident report that was, to say the least, complicated to write. My supervisor read it twice and then looked at me across the desk for a long moment before saying, very quietly, that he was glad I was still alive, and that we would not be filing it the usual way. I understood what he meant. Some things that happen out here do not fit into official categories. Some things require a different kind of accounting. In the years since that afternoon in the eastern sector, I have thought often about what it means to be helped by something that had no reason to help you. The lion 6 years ago did not know me. He owed me nothing. Whatever moved him out of that grass and into the path of those elephants was not calculation or mercy or any concept that fits into human language. And yet here I am. And 6 years later, here he was, old now, scarred, trapped, surrounded, with no strength left. And here I was too. Standing in front of a pack of hyenas with a broken radio and a rifle going empty. Not calculating. Not reasoning. Just running forward because there was a scar on a lion's cheek that I had never forgotten, and something inside me that had never finished paying a debt I could not name. I do not know if the lion that walked away into that dark savannah is still alive today. Lions of his age face odds that do not favor longevity. But I know that he walked away that evening under his own power, his head held low but his steps steady, moving back into the wilderness that had made him and broken him and was still, somehow, his. And I know that wherever he went, there was a crescent scar on his left cheek, put there by an elephant's tusk on the day he stepped between a herd and a terrified young ranger who had no idea what was about to save his life. Some debts cannot be measured. Some things happen in this world that make you believe, against all your training and all your skepticism, that something connects us to these animals that goes deeper than biology. I cannot prove it. I can only tell you what I have lived. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. These animals deserve to have their stories told. Thank you for being here.